You gotta love the irony that after everyone took themselves out the running for the Oscar hosting job and we had to go through the whole will he, won't he thing with Kevin Hart, that we've now got a movie that everyone took themselves out of the running for until Kevin Hart came on board. Ah, cinema. No, really. Chris Rock, Jamie Foxx, Chris Tucker, and Idris Elba all turned this down before they got Kevin Hart to do it. Like, they even had Colin Firth playing the other guy. Movies are funny, right? Anywho, so it's been 7 years and the English language remake of The Intouchables is finally upon us, and, well, how did it fare? Actually, not too badly. So, if your knowledge of French comedies has some gaps in it, The Intouchables was a pretty great movie back in 2011 that adapted the true story of the friendship that developed between a quadriplegic billionaire and the ex-con he hired as his carer. Obviously, the two couldn't be more different, and an unlikely bond formed between them as they began to sort of see their lives with the added perspective of the other, and yeah, it was a really sweet story. I really love that movie. This American remake, which comes to us from Limitless and Divergent director Neil Burger, ditches literally none of that. Nor indeed does it ditch a single solitary plot point from the French original, though it somehow manages to go on for 15 minutes longer. I mean, it's not quite Suspiria, but, you know, it's worth mentioning. You see, The Intouchables was quite a charming and likeable dramedy that took its time unfurling its characters and allowed their bond to form in a sort of manner and with the pacing of what you'd expect of a French dramedy. And, well, transplanted to the US with next to no alterations, it kind of feels, well, slow, I guess. Our two leads are terrific regardless. In fact, I was shocked to discover that once he's done with all his screeching and wall bouncing, Kevin Hart really can act. I mean, very well too. It's the kind of role I'd not seen him in before, and he absolutely knocks it out the park. And I say that as someone with friends who actually refuse to watch The Secret Life of Pets simply because of how annoying they find his voice. I mean, let's be honest, if that's the case, it kind of makes you wish Chris Tucker had stuck around just to screw with him, huh? Nah, Hart's got the goods here. He really lands those emotional punches. His comedic moments are quite downplayed and everyman in their execution. And, I mean, it's not the brilliantly deadpan delivery that Omar Sy brought to the original, but it's coming from a similar place, and it works just as well on its own ground. As for Cranston, well, do we even need to discuss Cranston? I mean, dude's great, kills it here. Of course he does, he's Bryan Cranston. I mean, the man even made the ropey-ass finale of Breaking Bad look half decent. I mean, I'd half expected the remake of this would shift the focus more over to his character, but they've actually kind of kept the even split going nicely, and Cranston brings as much emotional devastation as you come to expect of him from what's kind of arguably a rather stock character in the larger sense. The chemistry between the two is terrific. I mean, Hart arguably gets the shortest straw simply by way of his character's more cartoonish, embrace of certain elements and things like opera, stuff like that, for instance. The pairing really delivers, though. Bolsters the highs so they really soar, and gives for some admittedly more cliched but still pretty solid emotional lows. It's also really nice to see Nicole Kidman getting the spread her wings in something a bit more of a submissive role than we're used to seeing her in too. I mean, maybe it's because she knew she had Destroyer on the way to bag her those awards noms, but she's made a concerted effort here to have real fun as Cranston's sort of tough nut assistant. She's the beneficiary here too of what's really the only change to the original story, and given how genuinely likable she is throughout, you can kind of see why. Particularly as doing so kind of opens up by the opportunity for like a further emotional hand-wringing scene that Cranston absolutely annihilates. It's a little bit more of a pedestrian effort from Berger as a director. I mean, the upside's all about that dramedy balance. Unfortunately, John Hartmere's screenplay kind of keeps a little bit too much of the original material and doesn't extol much in the way of streamlining or altering any of it for Western audiences. It's definitely one of those remakes that feels more like it was done just to get the movie in English rather than to actually adapt that story, for an English-speaking audience. So, more like funny games than Infernal Affairs and Departed, if you know what I mean. If you've never had the pleasure of seeing The Intouchables, though, I thoroughly recommend it. But be aware that you might find that very French pacing, just a little bit cumbersome. Good movie though, 3 stars. I really liked Cranston and Kevin Hart. It was nice seeing Nicole Kidman doing something outside of her wheelhouse, and shut up, I've not seen Destroyer yet. And I've wanted to revisit The Untouchables for a few years anyway, so this kind of saved me the job. I mean, it really, really is exact in being a remake, you wouldn't even believe. Like, remember that first season of the American version of The Office? Like, yeah, like that. But really, really liked it. So, before we talk about the frontrunner, show of hands. Roughly how many people under 40 have ever heard of Gary Hart outside the existence of this movie? I can't say yes, so I'm just going to assume it's very few. So, Gary Hart was a senator who in 1988 took a run at the presidency and was generally regarded as a shoo-in for the Resolute desk. And then he did something really, really stupid and just dared the press to stake a tail on him because he claimed he had nothing to hide. So, naturally, and before you could even finish saying the name Shyamalan, it turned out he really did have something to hide in the form of a relationship with a Miami journalist, a relationship that near instantly disintegrates his career. Hugh Jackman's our Gary Hart here. You've got Vera Farmiga as his wife Lee, and his potential mistress is former child actress and star of the actually kind of fun Shark Night, Sarah Paxton. They're all pretty good too. The film, however, is very much not. You see, The Frontrunner is directed by Jason Reitman, who also co-wrote it with former political correspondent Matt Bai and former political strategist Jay Carson, all of whom seem to have neglected the age-old guideline that to make any kind of story work for a visual medium, like cinema, you have to show and not tell. It's kind of why this isn't a podcast. It's a point you'd imagine they can't have wrestled too much with, considering The Frontrunner contains a level of exposition so overindulgent that it comes perilously close at times to simply having its characters break the fourth wall and narrate the thing. That level of procedural anti-characterization, that can kind of work sometimes in very rare cases. I mean, think about Michael Mann's The Insider and how that used its largely procedural style to explore what made those central characters tick. And The Frontrunner really wants to be like that, but it relies way, way too heavily on the audience bringing with them a level of cursory knowledge it's just unreasonable to expect. I mean, Hart himself, we're told, is like a beacon of all-American virtue, but we see absolutely no sign of that to begin with. So when it comes to his public unraveling, we've kind of got no investment in him for that to kind of carry any weight. I mean, seriously, there are casualty guest stars with more defined personalities than Hugh Jackman in the lead role of this movie. No joke. The Frontrunner just feels like a movie fast-tracked in the wake of Spotlight hitting big, yet having learnt nothing from the comparative dismissal of Steven Spielberg's The Post less than a year later. Both of those movies had their journalistic elements to fall back on, but this really wants Gary Hart to be its anchor instead, which would be fine if he were in any way resembling a human being, but works immeasurably less well when he's kind of just some dude spouting brief monologues with a flop sweat. The central theology here is unmistakably in the title of the book it's based on, which was The Week America Went Tabloid, and that admittedly would make for a rather interesting story to tell, but by not showing us any real aspects of itself, the story falls flat by virtue of being just staggeringly overtold. Perhaps it's too many cooks, maybe the material simply isn't there, but for those who don't know the Gary Hart story to begin with, seeing The Frontrunner simply won't fulfill that basic remit. I mean, for one thing, it's too dry, for another it's too dull, it's far too slow in how it attempts to tell the story. It's also pretty bum-numbing. I mean, it clocks in at only a hair short of 2 hours. Stylistically, Reitman's gone for quite a handheld, grainy look, a lot like the movie he's noticeably trying to ape, but, I mean, he's reunited with his frequent collaborator Eric Steelberg for the visuals, so at least it's well lit. I kind of thought Rob Simonson felt a little restrained with his score for this too, he's given a score for things like Moneyball and Life of Pi in the past, but this just feels oddly forgettable by comparison, and completely forgettable on its own merits. I mean, which to be fair, kind of more or less sums up the Frontrunner entirely. 2 stars for the performances, next to nil points for anything else. This kind of just felt like a waste of time for everyone involved and for me watching it. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, rate, and review.